Good evening. I'm Alex DeLucia, your host this evening for Brookfield Today and Beyond. One of the things I found interesting in your positions was that you had a very big point on how important Israel is to our country. And that was unique because not since I was down at Georgetown School of Foreign Service have I heard anybody seriously debate that. Obviously, you must feel there are some things in Chris Murphy's policies that are less friendly. Why don't you talk about your view there?
Well, it's very significant. I mean, we have a very historically important and significant relationship between the United States and Israel. Israel is one of our closest friends and allies anywhere in the world, and we ought to make sure that we never forget that. And there are times, frankly, when Chris Murphy has. When many members of Congress were asked to sign a letter to the President reaffirming the unique and special relationship between Israel and the United States, Chris Murphy refused to sign it. And that's one of many examples of, I think, Congressman Murphy forgetting about that unique and special relationship that exists between our two countries, which is important not only as a matter of principle, but as a matter of policy, because we have a strong friend in a region of the world where we need to have as many strong friends as possible, and we've never had a stronger friend in that region than Israel. So apart from the moral imperative of supporting a strong democracy that we were instrumental in helping to form, as in the State of Israel, we have a national security and foreign policy objective in ensuring that we have a friendly, strong, stable democracy in the Middle East. And we have that in Israel. And while we need to promote peace in the Middle East, we need to make sure that we don't unilaterally go in and impose solutions on actors in that world, including Israel, and we need to make sure that we always stand up and protect our friend in Israel.
I don't think we can bring up the Mideast without bringing up defense policy. I know that you've said that defending our nation is very important. Why don't you elaborate a bit on how you feel things could have been better handled in the Mideast?
That's interesting. Well, the foreign policy and military policy is very, very important because it goes back to what's the role of the federal government. And there are so many areas where the federal government has encroached into realms where the founders never intended the federal government to have a role. But one of the core functions of the federal government is to make sure that we protect our national security. And one of the core tools in protecting our national security is our military. And so we need to make sure that we always have the strongest, most robust, best funded military in the world. And I also believe that if we're going to go into any part of the world, we should always use force as a last resort. But if we're going to go in and use force anywhere, we need to have clear objectives, a clear outcome that we're seeking, a very clear articulation of the policy, and then you've got to trust your commanders on the ground to put the tactics and the strategy in place that they feel they need to put in place in order to carry out the broader strategic objective that we've articulated as a country, once you've done it clearly. And some of the areas where I think we've made mistakes over the years is where we haven't always, where we have politicized military decision making. And ultimately, the president is the commander-in-chief. It ultimately falls on his or her shoulders. I believe we'll have a female president someday to make that decision. But once you do, you have to empower your commanders on the ground to do what they do best. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we've made over the years is to politicize what are essentially military decisions. And we have to always make sure that once we set out a clear framework and a clear objective, we trust our commanders on the ground to do what they think is best.
It was interesting you mentioned the idea of a female president. As I recall, you sponsored legislation calling for equal pay for women. You want to just briefly elaborate on that?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. That was one of my leading initiatives, and I was very proud to be able to introduce that and get that passed. And I did it by working cooperatively with a coalition of both Republicans and Democrats. And that's exactly the kind of bipartisanship that I want to bring to Washington as the next 5th District Congressman. But the facts are that women are still consistently getting underpaid substantially than men for performing the same work. That's absolutely unacceptable. And so I felt that we needed to strengthen our equal pay laws in Connecticut to make sure that our employers, whenever there is any pay discrimination, are forced to justify it in the strongest possible terms, because they've got to prove that that disparity is legitimate, because if they can't prove it, then there should never be a disparity. And I think anything we can do to strengthen those laws, which we did in this case, and I was very proud that the law had the support not only of advocates for women, but also of the business community as being a balanced proposal, is critically important. Because in this day and age, the notion that a woman would get paid less than a man for doing the same work simply because of her gender is something that we shouldn't even be discussing today. And yet the data shows that that continues to be true. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that there's absolute equality between men and women in the workforce.
And I'm going to bring up a couple other things that you voted on so you can talk about them.
Yeah.
I think they give a good insight into how you view the world. You called for the tough guy in you called for tougher criminal sanctions, and you sponsored the three-strike law, and the side of you that sees a fairness issue called for higher minimum wages.
Yeah.
Want to talk about those two issues?
Well, I appreciate that, Alex, and I think those show that I try to take each issue one at a time, and I try to do what I think is right, one issue at a time. I was the leading proponent in the legislature for three strikes and you're outlaw. I represent Cheshire, and Cheshire was where the horrific Pettit tragedy occurred. That incident forced me to take a hard look at our criminal justice laws, and among other things, I reached the conclusion that we didn't have strong mandatory minimum sentences for repeat violent criminals. And it's very simple. Three strikes and you're out says if you are a repeat violent criminal, and I'm not talking about stealing a loaf of bread, I'm talking about rape, manslaughter, serious crimes against other persons, and you've done it not just once, not just twice, but 3 times, and we've tried to reform you and rehabilitate you, and yet you have shown a propensity to continue to commit those crimes, you are someone we should take off our streets, period. Because you present a clear and present danger to society. And it's simply a matter of taking people off the streets who have proven themselves willing to commit repeatedly, over a period of years sometimes, very serious crimes. And to me, it's a matter of common sense, and I'm going to keep fighting for it as long as I'm in the Senate, and if I go to Congress, to strengthen the federal three strikes law. Minimum wages is, to me, also an issue of justice and fairness. And I took a long look at it. I was one of only 2 Republicans in the legislature to support an increase in the minimum wage, and not everybody agreed with me. Bottom line, I looked at all the data and saw no correlation between increases in the minimum wage in Connecticut and job loss. If I ever saw that, I would never support it, because it's all ultimately about jobs. But when the data showed no correlation between the two, and I was representing a lot of people, I can think of a single mom in particular who came here, and she's a citizen, and she's raising her children alone, and she works in a pizza parlor, and this bill came up at a time when gas prices were starting to spike. That extra $30 a week meant that she could pay for that extra gas that she needed, because those prices went through the roof. And so for me, once I found no evidence that it was going to hurt job growth, then it became about helping people. And I know people firsthand who have been helped by that.
I'm sure a lot of people have. I don't doubt for a moment that there are a number of questions that our listeners would love to ask you. So it is my strong hope that our listeners take me up this evening on sending in questions. I'm going to be giving you his website, and I'll be giving you our own. Again, this is Brookfield Today and Beyond, sponsored by the Republican Town Committee of Brookfield. And we are here this evening, and our website is www.brookfieldgop.com. And we have the other website, which is www.samforcongress.com.
That's right.
And they could also find Sam Caligiuri for Congress on Facebook and Caligiuri 2010 on Twitter.
Yeah.
You're quite the...
people love it, Alex.
Yeah, 21st century man.
I love communicating with people. And ultimately, I believe in a strong dialogue, and Facebook and Twitter and that type of social media is a terrific way of communicating with people, and they love it.
And I'm assuming